The world had gone white. Not a soft, gentle white, but a furious, howling white that screamed against the windows of the small, isolated cabin. Cora pulled her thick woolen blanket tighter around her shoulders, a cup of steaming tea warming her hands. From her chair by the stone fireplace, she could feel the vibration of the wind, a relentless giant trying to shake her home apart. She was used to solitude, to the quiet of the mountain, but this storm was different. It felt angry and personal. Every log in the stack by the hearth, every jar of preserves on the shelf, every book on the mantelpiece was a testament to her self-reliance. She had chosen this life, away from the complicated buzz of the town below, away from the memories that sometimes still pinched her heart. Here, there was only the whisper of the pines, the chatter of the creek, and the occasional cry of a hawk. Until today. Now there was only the roar. A sudden sharp sound cut through the storm's monotone roar. It wasn't the creak of a tree branch or the rattle of a loose shutter. This was something else. A thump. Then a low, desperate whine. Cora froze, her tea halfway to her lips. She listened, straining her ears against the wind's fury. There it was again. A scraping sound like something heavy being dragged across her wooden porch. Her first thought was a bear, confused by the early storm. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She set her cup down with a quiet click and moved slowly to the window, peering through a small patch in the frost that she wiped away with her sleeve. The world outside was a swirling vortex of snow, visibility reduced to mere feet. She could see nothing but the white veil. Then a movement. A dark, hulking shape against the pure white of the porch rail. It was large, far too large to be a fox or a stray dog. Fear clenched her stomach. She should bolt the door, stoke the fire, and wait it out. Whatever it was, it would surely move on. It had to. But the sound came again. Not a growl, not a threat. It was a whimper. A sound of pure agony and exhaustion. It was the sound of a creature in its final moments, a plea for a mercy the storm would not provide. Cora's fear warred with a deep, instinctive compassion that was the very core of who she was. She couldn't just let something suffer. Not on her doorstep. Not when she had warmth and shelter to give. Her decision made, she moved quickly. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace, holding it like a weapon, a futile gesture against a bear, but it made her feel braver. She approached the front door, her hand trembling slightly as she turned the cold iron latch. The wind immediately grabbed the door, yanking it open and sending a blast of icy air and snow into the room, making the fire spit and dance. Cora squinted into the blinding gale. There, curled into a tight ball against the doorframe, was a wolf. It was the biggest wolf she had ever seen, even in pictures. Its fur was a magnificent mix of charcoal gray and silver, now matted with ice and blood. A deep, ugly gash ran along its hind leg, staining the clean snow beneath it a shocking crimson. Its sides heaved with ragged, shallow breaths. As she stood there, the wolf lifted its head. And in that moment, every ounce of fear left her. Its eyes were not the savage, yellow eyes of a wild predator. They were a startling, intelligent pale blue like winter sky. They held no threat, only a profound, soul-deep weariness and a silent, desperate appeal. It looked at her, and then its head drooped back down onto its paws as if the effort to hold it up was too much. It was surrendering to its fate right there on her porch. Cora didn't hesitate. She dropped the poker with a clatter. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to the giant animal. "Okay, it's okay." She spoke in a soft, steady voice, the way one might talk to a frightened child. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe now." She pushed the door open wider, fighting against the wind. "Come on," she urged. "You can come inside. It's warm." The wolf didn't move. It seemed too weak, too far gone. Cora's mind raced. She couldn't possibly drag an animal that size. Thinking fast, she ran back inside, grabbed the old, thick woolen rug from in front of the fireplace, and spread it out just inside the door. Then she went back out into the storm, ignoring the biting cold that numbed her face and hands. She gently placed her hands on the wolf's massive shoulder, pushing with all her might. "Please," she begged. "You have to help me. Just a little." As if understanding her words, the wolf let out a low grunt and, with a tremendous effort, scrabbled with its 3 good legs, pushing itself forward. It was a slow, painful process, but inch by inch, it moved across the threshold and collapsed onto the warm rug inside the cabin. Cora quickly shoved the door closed, locking out the storm and the cold. The great beast lay on her floor, panting, its breath forming little clouds in the air. The heat from the fire was already beginning to melt the ice in its fur, creating a small puddle around it. The smell of wet dog and blood filled the room. Cora knelt a safe distance away, her own breath catching in her throat. She had just let a wild wolf into her home. What had she done? But as she looked at the creature, seeing the steady rise and fall of its chest, seeing the way its eyes, now half closed, reflected the dancing flames, she knew she had done the right thing. She filled a bowl with fresh water and set it near its head. The wolf didn't drink, but its ear twitched in acknowledgement. Cora then fetched a basin of warm water, clean cloths, and her medical kit. She knew she had to clean that wound. She approached slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. "I need to look at your leg," she said softly. "It's going to be okay." The wolf watched her, those intelligent blue eyes tracking her every move, but it didn't growl or bare its teeth. It simply allowed. As she gently began to clean the blood away from the gash, the wolf flinched but remained still, a low rumble in its chest that sounded more like a sigh of relief than a growl of warning. In the warm, firelit silence of the cabin, with the storm raging impotently outside, an unlikely bond was forged between the lonely woman and the frozen wolf. The silence inside the cabin was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The only sounds were the crackle and pop of the pine logs in the fireplace and the heavy rhythmic breathing of the enormous wolf stretched out on the rug. Cora remained kneeling a few feet away, her own heart still thumping a wild rhythm against her ribs. The reality of her situation began to settle over her like a weight. She was sharing her small, solitary space with a predator. A magnificent, injured, and terrifyingly large predator. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, her initial spike of adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cautious, growing curiosity. The wolf made no move to threaten her. It simply lay there, its massive head resting on its paws, those pale blue eyes watching her with an unnerving level of awareness. They weren't the glazed, wild eyes of a feral animal. They were clear, focused, and deeply intelligent. It was as if it was studying her just as much as she was studying it. Cora slowly got to her feet, her muscles stiff from tension and cold. The wolf's eyes followed her every movement, but it didn't stir. She moved to the fireplace, adding another log to the flames, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The action was automatic, a familiar ritual of comfort. She needed to keep the fire strong, not just for her own warmth, but for her guest. The word guest felt strange and entirely inadequate in her mind. She glanced back at the animal. The pool of melted snow around it was growing, tinged pink with blood. She couldn't leave it like that. Gathering her courage, she went to the cupboard and pulled out more old towels and rags. She approached the wolf slowly, holding the cloths out in front of her like a peace offering. "I'm just going to clean this up," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She expected it to flinch or growl as she bent down to sop up the water. But it didn't. It merely blinked its slow, heavy blinks, its breath warm on her hands. Its fur, where it was drying, was incredibly thick and soft. The sheer size of it up close was breathtaking. It could easily overpower her if it wanted to. The fact that it didn't was a mystery that both comforted and unnerved her. Once the floor was drier, a new problem presented itself. The wound on its leg was still seeping blood. It needed proper attention. Cora's medical kit was basic, meant for cuts and splinters and the occasional burn from the wood stove, not for treating a wild animal. But she had to try. She brought the basin of warm water and her supplies over, setting them down with a soft clatter. The wolf lifted its head to look at the items, then at her. Its gaze was so direct, so human-like, that Cora felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "This might sting a little," she said, feeling silly for talking to it like a person but needing the sound of her own voice to fill the heavy silence. She soaked a clean cloth in the warm water and, with a hand that trembled only slightly, began to gently dab at the gash on its hind leg. The wolf stiffened immediately. A low rumble started deep in its chest, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards. Cora froze, her blood turning to ice. This was it. This was the moment it would turn on her. But the sound never escalated into a snarl. It was a grumble of pain, not a threat of violence. After a tense moment, the wolf laid its head back down with a heavy sigh, as if resigning itself to the necessary discomfort. Emboldened, Cora continued, cleaning the wound as best she could. It was deep, but it looked clean, as if made by a sharp blade rather than a tooth or claw. Another mystery. She applied a generous amount of antiseptic salve, the sharp smell filling the air, and then hesitated. She had nothing to bandage it with that would stay on. In the end, she decided to leave it open to the air, trusting the salve and the cleanliness to do their work. Exhaustion was beginning to pull at her own eyelids. The adrenaline had drained away completely, leaving her feeling hollow and tired. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, the wind seemed to be howling even louder, rattling the window panes in their frames. She looked from the wolf to her small bed in the corner of the single-room cabin. Sleep felt impossible. How could she possibly sleep with a wild animal in the room? Yet the animal in question seemed to have no such worries. Its breathing had evened out into a slow, steady rhythm, and its eyes were fully closed. It had fallen asleep. The trust, or perhaps the sheer exhaustion, it displayed was absolute. Cora finally gave in to her own weariness. She dragged her chair a little closer to the fire, wrapped herself tightly in her blanket and curled up in the seat. It was uncomfortable, but she felt safer being upright. She watched the sleeping wolf, its sides rising and falling, its fur glowing in the firelight. In sleep, it looked less like a monster and more like a creature of great beauty and power, a king of the forest brought low by misfortune. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, a deafening crack jerked her awake. The wind had ripped a shutter loose from one of her bedroom windows, and it was now slamming violently against the cabin wall. A moment later, a pane of glass shattered, and a torrent of freezing wind and snow blasted into the room. Cora cried out, scrambling from her chair. The cold was immediate and brutal, extinguishing the candles on her table and making the fire in the hearth gutter and smoke. She had to block it fast or the entire cabin would become an icebox. Before she could even move to find a board or a blanket to stuff into the hole, a large gray shadow moved past her. The wolf was on its feet. It moved with a pronounced limp, but its actions were deliberate. It ignored the biting wind and the driving snow, and with a powerful leap that made Cora gasp, it placed its own large body directly into the broken window frame. It turned sideways, its broad back and flank perfectly sealing the hole, blocking the blizzard's entry. The wind's howl was immediately muffled. The wolf let out a soft whine as the cold glass and wood pressed against its wound, but it didn't move. It stood there, a living barrier, a fortress against the storm. Cora stood frozen, not from cold but from awe. Her fear finally, completely vanished. This was no mere animal. This was something more. She approached slowly and without thinking, placed her hand gently on its side, feeling the strong muscles tense against the cold. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The wolf turned its head, those blue eyes meeting hers in the dim light. It gave a short, soft huff of air, a sound that felt like an acknowledgement. Then it settled in resolute. Cora pulled her blankets and made a nest on the floor right beside it, leaning against the wall for support. She would keep it company through this long, strange night. She was no longer alone with a wolf. She was sheltered by a guardian. The deep, pre-dawn quiet of the cabin was a world away from the fury of the night before. The storm had finally blown itself out, leaving behind an eerie, profound silence. The only light came from the soft, gray glow of morning filtering through the frost-covered windows and the faint, pulsing embers in the fireplace. Cora woke slowly, her neck stiff from sleeping propped up against the wall, her body nestled in the blankets beside the great wolf. For a blissful moment, the events of the previous night felt like a strange and vivid dream. Then she remembered. Her eyes flew open. The broken window. The wolf. She turned her head, expecting to see the massive gray form acting as a living shield against the cold. But the space was empty. A jolt of panic, sharp and sudden, shot through her. Had it left? Had it slipped out into the dawn while she slept? She scrambled to her feet, her blanket falling to the floor. The cabin was still and cold. The hole in the window was indeed unblocked, letting in a chill breeze, but it had been partially patched from the outside with a piece of broken shutter, a makeshift job that had clearly been done by hand. Her eyes scanned the room and that's when she saw him. A man. A stranger. He was asleep on the rug before the fireplace, exactly where the wolf had first collapsed. He was shirtless, his skin pale in the weak light, and he was curled on his side, one arm tucked under his head for a pillow. A rough, woolen blanket was pulled haphazardly over his legs. He was deeply asleep, his breathing even and slow. And on his right leg, exactly where the wolf's terrible gash had been, was a long, angry-looking red wound, freshly cleaned and smeared with the same salve she had used. Cora's breath caught in her throat. Her mind, still fuzzy with sleep, struggled to put the pieces together. The wolf was gone. A wounded man was in its place. The salve on his leg. The intelligence in the wolf's eyes. The way it had understood her. It was impossible. It was madness. And yet, the evidence was lying right in front of her. She must have made a sound, a sharp intake of breath, a rustle of her clothes because the man's eyes snapped open. They were the same pale blue. The exact same winter sky eyes that had watched her from a wolf's face. He moved with a fluid, startling grace for someone who was injured, pushing himself up to a sitting position in one smooth motion. He didn't look threatening. He looked wary and deeply embarrassed. He pulled the blanket higher, covering his bare torso, his gaze fixed on her, waiting for her reaction. Cora could only stare, her hand pressed to her mouth. The words finally tumbled out, a stunned whisper. You were the wolf. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of a reality that had just rewritten her entire understanding of the world. The man nodded slowly, his expression serious. "My name is Jax," he said, his voice a low, rough baritone that filled the quiet room. It was the voice of someone who didn't speak often, but when he did, it commanded attention. "And yes, I am what your stories call a werewolf. A shifter." Cora took an involuntary step back, her back pressing against the cold wall of the cabin. Her heart was hammering again, a frantic drum against her ribs. Werewolves weren't real. They were creatures of campfire tales and scary movies. They didn't appear in your home, wounded and shirtless, with eyes that held a universe of secrets. Seeing her fear, Jax's shoulders slumped slightly. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I am not here to hurt you. You must believe that. If I wanted to, I could have done it last night." He gestured to his leg. "You saved my life. I could never bring harm to you." His words were simple and direct, and they carried the weight of truth. Cora's logical mind fought against the fantastical truth, but her heart, the same heart that had trusted the wolf, remembered the feeling of safety she had felt with him standing guard at the window. She remembered the intelligence in his gaze. "How?" was the only word she could manage to get out. Jax took a slow breath, as if choosing his words carefully. "My people, we have lived in these mountains for a long time. Hidden. We can take the form of the wolf. It is who we are, not a curse." He glanced toward the window. "I was ambushed. Members of a rival pack. They won our territory. I was separated from my friends. I was outnumbered. I took that wound defending myself. The storm hit and I was losing blood, losing strength. I could barely see. I caught the scent of wood smoke and followed it. I saw your light. I had no other choice. I had to beg for your shelter." He said the word beg with a hint of shame, as if the act of asking for help was foreign and difficult for him. Cora's initial shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a torrent of questions. "You understood everything I said? Everything I did?" "Yes," Jax said simply. "In both forms, my mind is my own. I understood your kindness, your fear, your compassion. I felt it all." He looked down at his leg. "And I felt your gentle hands when you tended to me. Thank you for that." The memory of cleaning the wolf's wound, of talking to it, of sleeping beside it, now felt incredibly intimate and overwhelming. She had been caring for a man. A naked, wounded, incredibly handsome man. A flush of heat rose to her cheeks. "You stayed at the window," she said, her voice softer now. "You were hurt, but you stayed to block the cold." Jax met her gaze, his blue eyes intense. "You gave me shelter. You gave me warmth and aid when you had every reason to be terrified and to turn me away. Protecting you from the storm was the least I could do. It was an honor." The word honor struck her. It was such an old-fashioned, formal word. It spoke of a code, a way of life she knew nothing about. Silence fell between them again, but the fear was gone. In its place was a buzzing, electric sense of wonder and a dawning, terrifying realization. Her quiet, solitary life had just been irrevocably broken open. The man sitting on her rug, with his wolf's eyes and his kingly bearing, was a secret that was too big for her small cabin. And he was looking at her not as a monster, but as a man deeply in her debt. The silence that followed Jax's revelation was thicker and heavier than the snowdrifts piling up outside the cabin. Cora remained pressed against the wall, the rough-hewn logs cool through her shirt, as if the solid, familiar reality of her home could ground her in a world that had just tilted off its axis. A werewolf. A real, living werewolf was sitting on her rug, shirtless, wounded, and looking at her with an expression that was equal parts apology and defiance. Her mind was a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts. The intelligence in the wolf's eyes. The understanding. The way he had protected her. It all made a terrifying, impossible sense. The stories were wrong. They weren't mindless beasts, they were something else entirely. Jax broke the silence, his voice careful, measured. "I know this is a lot to accept. My presence here puts you in danger. The ones who attacked me, if they suspect a human is involved, if they catch my scent here?" He let the sentence hang, the unspoken threat chilling the air more effectively than the draft from the patched window. "I need to heal. Just for a day or two. Then I will be gone and you will never have to think of me or my kind again." You have my word. Cora finally found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. Your word. It felt like such a small human thing to offer in the face of such enormity. It is all I have to give you right now, Jack said, and there was a gravity in his tone that made it feel like more than enough. But it is binding. I will not harm you. I will not betray your trust. And I will leave as soon as I am able. He needed to heal. The wound on his leg was still an angry, painful-looking red. She had seen how he'd limped to the window last night. He was in no condition to go back out into the frozen wilderness, especially with enemies hunting him. Her choice, which had felt so simple with a wolf, was now infinitely more complicated with a man. A very large, very muscular man who was currently half-naked in her living space. Her eyes flickered around the one-room cabin. Her bed was in the corner. Her chair by the fire. Her small kitchen area. There was no privacy. Nowhere for him to go. Nowhere for her to retreat to. You can't stay like that, she said, gesturing vaguely at his lack of clothing, her cheeks warming again. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Jax's lips, the first she had seen there. It transformed his stern, handsome face, making him look younger. Shifting heals many things, but it is hard on fabric, he explained, a hint of dry humor in his voice. My clothes did not survive the fight or the change. Cora nodded, her practical nature kicking in, pushing the surreal horror aside. Action was needed. She moved to an old wooden chest at the foot of her bed, her movements slightly stiff. She rummaged inside and pulled out a pair of her late father's old trousers and a thick flannel shirt. They would be too short for him, but they would have to do. She laid them on the floor near him, keeping a respectful distance. You can wear these, she said, not meeting his eyes. I'll turn around. She turned her back to him, facing the fireplace, listening to the rustle of fabric and his slight, suppressed grunt of pain as he moved to pull on the clothes. The domestic normality of the sound was bizarrely comforting. Thank you. His voice came from behind her. They are appreciated. She turned back. The sight of this powerful, otherworldly man wearing her father's too small clothes, the flannel shirt stretched taut across his broad shoulders, the trousers ending well above his ankles, was almost comical. It made him seem less like a mythical creature and more real, vulnerable. Okay, Cora said, taking a deep breath and crossing her arms over her chest. Rules? Jax's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded, listening intently. He stood as if at attention, despite his injury. You can stay for 2 days. No more. You stay on that side of the room near the fireplace. I stay on this side near my bed. You don't change. Not in here. Not unless it's an emergency like last night. The thought of a wolf suddenly appearing in the confined space made her heart skip a beat. Understood, Jack said, his tone utterly serious. And you tell me the truth, she added, her voice firming up. If the danger changes, if you sense anything, you tell me immediately. This is my home. I need to know. You have my word, he repeated, and she found herself believing him. The awkwardness set in then. What did one do with a werewolf roommate for 2 days? Cora busied herself with rebuilding the fire, the familiar task calming her nerves. Jax watched her, his eyes missing nothing. When she struggled to snap a thick piece of kindling, he reached out. Allow me, he said. He took the piece of wood from her hands. With a quick, precise motion of his hands that seemed to utilize a strength far beyond a normal man's, he snapped it cleanly in two and placed it neatly on the pile. Cora stared. Right. Thank you. She moved to the kitchen area to prepare some oatmeal, feeling his gaze on her back. The cabin, which had always felt spacious in its solitude, now felt incredibly small. Every movement, every breath was shared. She was hyper-aware of him, of the space he occupied, of the quiet power that radiated from him even when he was standing still. She brought him a bowl of oatmeal and a cup of water. He accepted them with a nod of thanks, eating with a deliberate neatness that was somehow both polite and ferocious. He consumed the food quickly, efficiently, as if fuel was a necessity to be addressed without ceremony. When he was done, he set the bowl down and looked at her, his pale eyes thoughtful. You live here alone, he stated. It wasn't a question. Yes, Cora said, defensiveness creeping into her voice. It is a good home, he said, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the well-stocked shelves, the neatly stacked books, the carefully mended quilt on the bed. Strong. It speaks of a strong person. He looked back at her. It is a rare thing to find such strength and such kindness in one person. The compliment was so unexpected, so sincere that Cora was left speechless. She simply nodded, picking up the empty bowl and turning away to wash it, her mind reeling. The frozen wolf was gone. In his place was a man who was dangerous, yes, but who was also respectful, oddly formal, and now incredibly paying her a compliment. The 2 days ahead promised to be the longest and most strange of her entire life. The first day passed in a bubble of strained, watchful quiet. Cora moved through her routines with a self-consciousness she hadn't felt since she was a teenager. Every action, from chow vegetables for a stew to brushing her hair, felt like it was being observed, analyzed, and catalogued by the silent, imposing figure who occupied the space by her fireplace. Jax, for his part, was a model prisoner, or guest. The distinction was blurring by the hour. He remained on his side of the room as agreed. He did not speak unless spoken to. His stillness was profound, not like a man relaxing, but like a predator conserving energy, every ounce of his attention focused on the process of healing and on the woman sharing his space. It was his watching that unnerved her the most. Those pale blue eyes followed her with an intensity that was neither threatening nor friendly, but simply absolute. He missed nothing. He saw her slight wince when she lifted a heavy pot, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the unconscious sigh she let out when she looked at the dwindling woodpile. It was as if he was learning her, memorizing the map of her life in this small cabin. By the afternoon of the second day, the awkwardness began to soften, worn away by the sheer monotony of coexistence and a growing, mutual curiosity. Cora, tired of jumping every time she caught his gaze, decided to break the silence. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. She nodded toward his leg. Jax looked down at the wound, which already looked less angry, the skin knitting together with a speed that was frankly unnatural. "Less today," he said. "The body knows how to heal itself. We just have to get out of its way." He flexed his foot experimentally, and only a slight tightening around his eyes betrayed any discomfort. "Must be a useful trick," Cora said, trying to keep her tone light. She was stirring a pot of stew on the wood stove, the rich, savory smell beginning to fill the cabin. "It has its advantages," he conceded. He was silent for a moment, then asked, "How long have you lived here?" "Alone." The question was gentle, not an accusation. Cora kept her back to him, focusing on the stew. "A few years," she said. I needed the quiet. It was a vast oversimplification of a painful past, of a life in town that had felt too loud, too crowded, too full of whispers and pitying looks after her family was gone. Jax seemed to sense the weight behind her simple answer. He didn't press. Instead he said, "The quiet here is different. It is not an empty quiet. It is a living one. You can hear the snow fall. You can hear the trees settle. It is a good place to hear your own thoughts." Cora turned to look at him, surprised. That was exactly it. That was the feeling she had never been able to put into words. He had understood it perfectly. "Yes," she said softly. "It is." That small moment of understanding became a crack in the dam. Later, as they ate the stew together, Cora at her small table, Jax cross-legged on his rug, he asked her about the books on her shelf. She found herself explaining her love for stories of adventure in far-off lands, a stark contrast to her own secluded life. He listened, his head tilted, as if her every word was a precious artifact. And then, tentatively, she asked about him. "What is it like? Do he change?" Jax considered the question, his spoon hovering over his bowl. "It is like taking a deep, deep breath after being underwater for too long," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "It is not becoming something else. It is becoming more of yourself. The world becomes sharper. Smells, sounds, the feel of the wind, it all becomes more." A faint, faraway look came into his eyes, a look of longing for something he could not have in this confined space. "It sounds beautiful," Cora whispered, captivated by the description. "It can be," he said. "And it can be terrifying. The instincts are stronger. The need to protect your own is overwhelming." His gaze flickered to her and then back to his food. As the evening drew in, Cora brought out a deck of worn playing cards. It was a silly, mundane thing to do with a mythical being, but she was desperate for a distraction from the tension that had begun to simmer between them, a tension that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the fact that he was a devastatingly attractive man and she was a woman who had been alone for a very long time. He didn't know how to play, so she taught him. They sat on the floor on opposite sides of the hearth, the cards between them. He learned with a quick, sharp intelligence that should not have been surprising. He was competitive, a low growl of frustration rumbling in his chest when he lost a hand, a flash of a triumphant smile when he won. That smile did something dangerous to Cora's equilibrium. It was during one of these games that it happened. They both reached for the deck to shuffle at the same time. Her hand, small and pale, covered his larger, rougher one. A jolt, like a spark from the fireplace, shot up her arm. It was electric and warm, a sudden, shocking connection that made her gasp softly. She froze, her eyes flying to his. Jax had frozen too. His gaze was locked on their joined hands, his expression one of stunned intensity. The air in the room grew thick and heavy, charged with a feeling that had been building for 2 days. The crackle of the fire was the only sound. He didn't pull his hand away. Instead, his thumb moved just barely, a ghost of a stroke across her knuckles. The sensation was so intimate, so unexpectedly tender, that Cora felt her breath catch. Her heart wasn't hammering with fear anymore, it was pounding with a wild, thrilling anticipation. She could see the same struggle in his eyes, the war between his ingrained caution and whatever powerful pull he was feeling toward her. It was Cora who broke the contact, pulling her hand back as if burned, her cheeks flaming. She busied herself with gathering the cards, her fingers trembling. It's getting late, she stammered, unable to look at him. Yes. Jax's voice was husky, deeper than usual. It is. She retreated to her side of the room, to her chair, pulling her blanket around her shoulders. But she could still feel the warm imprint of his hand on hers. The simple, accidental touch had changed everything. The cabin no longer felt like it was divided into her side and his side. An invisible line had been crossed, and the space between them now hummed with a promise of something neither of them was ready to name, but both of them could feel. The quiet was no longer just living, it was waiting. The memory of that electric touch hung in the air of the cabin like wood smoke, a scent you could almost taste. The next morning, the careful, polite distance between Cora and Jax felt different. It was no longer a boundary built on fear and strangeness, but a taut, trembling line stretched between two people intensely aware of each other. Every glance held a question. Every casual movement felt weighted with unspoken meaning. Jax's leg was healing at an astonishing rate. By the morning of the 3rd day, a day past the deadline she had set, he was moving around her side of the cabin with only the faintest hint of a limp, using a stick he'd whittled into a cane. He insisted on making himself useful, his formal, almost old-fashioned manners never fading. He chopped a new pile of firewood with a terrifying, efficient strength that made the axe seem like a toy in his hands. He repaired the broken window frame properly, his large, capable hands handling the tools with a practiced ease that spoke of a life very different from her own. Cora watched him work, her curiosity slowly overpowering her caution. "You're not just a werewolf," she ventured one afternoon as he neatly stacked the split logs by the hearth. "I mean, you lead them, don't you? You're someone important." Jax paused, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. He looked at her, and she saw the conflict in his eyes, the desire to be honest with her warring with the instinct to protect his secrets, and to protect her from them. "I have responsibilities," he said carefully, avoiding the direct answer. "My people rely on me. That is why the attack was so targeted. It was not random." The word alpha hung unspoken between them, but Cora heard it nonetheless. It explained so much. His natural air of command, the way he carried himself like royalty even in ill-fitting borrowed clothes, the deep, abiding sense of duty that seemed to radiate from him. This new understanding, however, came with a cold, sharp edge. The reality of his world, a world of violence and territorial disputes, was pressing in on her peaceful haven. Jax grew visibly more restless as the day wore on. He would often stop what he was doing and go very still, his head tilted, his nostrils flaring slightly as if catching a scent on the wind that she could not perceive. "What is it?" Cora asked, her own nerves beginning to fray. "Nothing for certain," he murmured, but his eyes were narrowed, scanning the tree line beyond the cabin windows. "The forest is never truly silent. But the birds have stopped singing to the west." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crept down Cora's spine. He was listening to the silence of the birds. That evening the tension escalated. Jax was standing by the front door, his body rigid with concentration, when he suddenly went perfectly still. A low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his chest, a sound so primal and threatening that it made the hair on Cora's arms stand on end. "Jax," she whispered, her blood turning to ice. He turned to her, his expression grim, all traces of the softness from the previous day gone. His eyes were the cold, focused eyes of the wolf. "They're here," he said, his voice a low, urgent rasp. "A scout. He's circling, testing the borders of my scent." Panic seized her. "What do we do?" "You will lock this door behind me. You will not open it for anyone. Do you understand?" "No one." His tone brooked no argument. It was the voice of the alpha, the leader, issuing a command to protect his charge. "Where are you going?" Cora asked, her voice trembling. "I have to lead him away from the cabin. I have to make him believe I am alone and vulnerable. If they think for a moment that I have human help—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The grim set of his jaw said it all. He was putting himself in danger to draw the threat away from her. "No, Jax, your leg is healed enough," he interrupted, his gaze softening for just a fraction of a second as he looked at her. "Cora, please. Trust me. This is what I must do." Before she could protest further, a long eerie howl sliced through the twilight silence outside. It was close. Too close. It was a sound of inquiry and menace, a promise of violence. Jax's face hardened. The decision was made. "Lock the door," he commanded one last time. Then, with a speed that belied his recent injury, he yanked the door open and slipped out into the growing darkness, pulling it shut behind him. Cora rushed forward, throwing the heavy iron bolt with shaking hands. Her heart was pounding so hard she felt dizzy. She pressed her eye to a small gap in the window shutter, her breath fogging the cold glass. Outside, the world was painted in shades of deep blue and black. For a moment she saw nothing. Then a massive gray wolf, her Jax, emerged from the shadow of the cabin. He stood tall in the clearing, his head held high, and let out an answering howl that was not a sound of fear but of defiance. It was a challenge. It echoed through the mountains, a king reclaiming his domain. From the tree line, another wolf, smaller and with mangy dark fur, slunk into view. It bared its teeth, a low snarl echoing in the quiet. Cora watched, her hand pressed to her mouth as Jax, the alpha, began to limp deliberately away from the cabin, leading the enemy scout on a chase away from her home and into the dangerous, moonlit night. Cora's world shrank to the narrow view through the gap in the shutter. Her breath hitched in her throat, forming frantic little clouds on the cold glass. The two wolves in the clearing below were a terrifying dance of shadow and muscle under the pale light of the rising moon. Jax, magnificent and powerful even with the faint hint of a limp, was leading the smaller, mangy-looking wolf on a chase away from the cabin. He moved with a deliberate, taunting slowness, a king drawing a foolish challenger away from his treasures. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear not for herself but for him. He was doing this for her. Putting himself between the danger and her door. The thought was as terrifying as it was humbling. A sudden sharp crack of a branch snapping under a heavy weight echoed from the opposite side of the cabin. Cora's head whipped around. Another howl, this one higher pitched and answered immediately by a third, joined the chorus from the west. They weren't alone. The scout hadn't been scouting. He had been herding. Jax was walking into a trap. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to paralyze her. She could lock the door, huddle in a corner and wait. It's what he had told her to do. It was the smart thing, the safe thing. But the image of Jax, surrounded and outnumbered because of her, because he was protecting her home, burned away the fear, leaving behind a white-hot core of determination. She was not a warrior. She was not a werewolf. But this was her home. And she would defend it. Her eyes scanned the single room, looking for weapons, for tools, for anything. The iron poker by the fireplace. The lanterns. Her mind, usually so calm and orderly, raced, putting together a plan born of sheer, desperate love. Moving quickly, she grabbed two of the oil lanterns from her shelf. Her hands trembled as she turned the small metal wheels, pumping the fuel until the mantles were saturated. She lit them both, the flames springing to life with a soft whoosh, casting wild, dancing shadows on the walls. Light. Fire. No wild animal, not even these, liked fire. Then she ran to the kitchen cupboard and pulled out her largest cast iron pot and the heavy metal ladle. Noise. Confusion. She unbolted the door, her heart in her throat. The cacophony of snarls and growls was much louder now, coming from the tree line just beyond her woodpile. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she stepped out onto the porch. The cold night air hit her like a slap. The scene before her was a nightmare. Jax, in his powerful wolf form, was a whirlwind of gray fury, but he was surrounded by 4 other wolves, their eyes glowing with a vicious hunger in the dark. They darted in, snapping at his flanks, trying to wear him down. He was holding them off, but just barely. "Hey!" Cora screamed, her voice cutting through the animal sounds like a knife. The attacking wolves' heads turned in unison, their glowing eyes fixing on her. For a split second, the attack on Jax faltered. It was all the opening he needed. With a roar of fury that was more human than animal, Jax lunged at the closest wolf, his powerful jaws clamping down on its shoulder and throwing it aside with a sickening thud against a tree. Cora didn't hesitate. She raised the pot and ladle and brought them together with a deafening clang clang clang. The harsh, metallic noise was utterly alien in the natural night, shocking the wolves, making them flinch and recoil with confused yelps. Then she raised the lanterns high above her head, swinging them in wide, frantic arcs. The flames streaked through the darkness, creating terrifying, moving shapes of light and shadow. "Get out of here," she yelled, her voice raw with fear and fury. "Get away from him." The combination of the blinding, unpredictable light and the jarring, awful noise was too much for the wolves. Their coordinated attack broke down into confusion. One of them, the mangy scout, turned and bolted into the woods. Another followed, its tail between its legs. The remaining two, braver or more foolish, hesitated. That was their mistake. Jax, empowered by her intervention, moved with a speed that was breathtaking. He was a blur of silver and wrath. He body-slammed one into the ground, a warning snap of his teeth near its throat making it go limp in submission. The last one turned to run, but Jax was on it in 2 bounds, his growl a promise of death if it didn't flee. It didn't need to be told twice. It vanished into the darkness. Silence descended, broken only by Cora's ragged panting and the hiss of the lanterns. Jax stood in the center of the clearing, his sides heaving, his magnificent fur ruffled. He turned his great head and looked at her. There was no anger in his gaze for her disobedience. No reproach. The pale blue eyes, glowing in the lantern light, held only a stunned, overwhelming awe. He took a step toward her, then another, his limp more pronounced now from the fight. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his massive head in a deep, unmistakable bow. It was a gesture of respect, of gratitude, of acknowledgement. Cora slowly lowered the lanterns in the pot, her arms aching. She looked down at the powerful, wild creature who had just bowed to her, and she understood. She hadn't just saved him. She had fought for him. She had proven herself. Not as a human hiding from monsters, but as a partner standing against the darkness. The fear was gone, replaced by a fierce, soaring pride and a connection to the wolf before her that felt deeper and more profound than anything she had ever known. The cabin, the woods, the moon, it all fell away until there was only the two of them, bound together not just by circumstance, but by a choice made in fire and courage. The silence after the battle was a living thing, thick and heavy with the echoes of snarls and the scent of pine, blood, and fear. Cora stood frozen on the porch, the cold metal of the lanterns and the pot still gripped tightly in her numb hands. Her entire body was trembling, not from the chill, but from the aftershock of the adrenaline that had coursed through her veins. She had never done anything like that in her entire life. She had never screamed into the face of danger, never charged into a fight. She had been a defender, a protector. And the magnificent creature standing in the moonlit clearing was looking at her as if she had hung the moon itself. Jax took a step forward, then another, his movement slightly labored. The fight had taken its toll on his recently healed leg. He moved with a new kind of grace, a deliberate slowness that spoke of exhaustion and profound respect. He didn't stop at the bottom of the steps this time. He ascended them, each step a quiet, weighty thud on the wooden planks. Cora didn't move. She couldn't. She was captivated, held in place by the intensity of his gaze. He was so close now she could see the individual flecks of silver in his blue eyes, could see the rise and fall of his chest as he breathed, could smell the wild, musky scent of wolf and forest that clung to him. He stopped before her, his head still lowered slightly from his bow. Then the air around him began to shimmer. It was a subtle distortion, like heat rising off sun-baked stone. There was no loud crack, no violent transformation. It was a seamless, almost beautiful melting of form. The gray fur receded, the powerful limbs elongated, the muzzle flattened. In the space of a single, held breath, the wolf was gone and the man stood in its place. He was shirtless again, his skin gleaming with a faint sheen of sweat in the moonlight. The borrowed trousers were torn at the knee. The wound on his leg was open again, a fresh trickle of blood tracing a path down his calf. But he seemed utterly unaware of it. His entire focus was on her. His expression was one of raw, undisguised wonder. He looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the very first time. As if the brave, fierce woman standing before him with fire in her hands had erased every other version of her he had ever known. "Cora," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. He reached out, his hand moving slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His fingers, calloused and strong, gently brushed a strand of hair that had come loose from her braid during the chaos. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a shockwave of sensation through her entire body. It was not the accidental touch from the card game. This was deliberate. Intimate. You are. He began, his voice husky with emotion. He seemed to be searching for words grand enough, powerful enough. You are the most astonishing creature I have ever encountered. Cora's breath caught. She could only stare up at him, her heart pounding a frantic, hopeful rhythm. You were told to stay inside, he said, but there was no reproach in his tone, only awe. You were told to be safe. Yet you walked into the night. You faced down a pack of wolves with light and noise. A disbelieving, almost giddy laugh escaped him. You fought for me. He took her hand, the one still holding the heavy ladle. Gently, he pried her fingers loose, letting the utensil clatter forgotten to the porch floor. He did the same with the lantern, setting it down safely aside. Then he held both of her hands in his thumbs stroking over her knuckles. No one has ever fought for me before, he whispered, the confession stark and vulnerable in the quiet night. They follow me. They obey me. They rely on me. But no one has ever stood with me like that. As an equal. He trailed off, his eyes searching hers. Cora finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. As a what? As a partner, he said, the word filled with a weight of meaning that took her breath away. You could have hidden. You could have been safe. But you chose me. You chose to stand with me. He lifted one of her hands and pressed his lips against her knuckles. The kiss was warm, firm, and sent a jolt of pure heat straight to her core. It was a gesture from another time, a knight honoring his lady, but it felt more real and more passionate than any kiss she had ever received. I told you I would leave when I was healed, he said, his lips still close to her skin, his breath warm. But I find now that I cannot. Cora's heart soared, but a sliver of fear, of reality, pierced the beautiful moment. Your pack, your responsibilities, the danger. All of it is real, he admitted, his eyes serious. But this, he squeezed her hands, this is real too. What I feel for you, Cora, it is not gratitude. It is not some fleeting fancy born of a strange situation. It is everything. He looked at her, his gaze open, laying his soul bare before her. I am Jax, Alpha of the Silvermane pack. I have spent my life leading, protecting, and being alone in a crowd of my own people. And then a fierce, beautiful, lonely woman in a mountain cabin saved my life, tended my wounds, and then defended me with fire and courage. You have seen the wolf and the man, and you have feared neither. You have challenged me and cared for me. He took a deep breath. I am in love with you, Cora. And I am asking you, will you come with me? Will you leave this solitude and enter my world? It will be dangerous. It will be strange. But I swear to you, I will spend every moment of every day making sure you never regret it. I will protect you, I will honor you, and I will love you for the rest of my days. The question hung in the air between them, vast and life-changing. He was offering her his world, his heart, his everything. Cora looked at this strong, powerful, vulnerable man who had crashed into her life like a meteor and realized with a stunning clarity that her solitude had never been peace. It had been waiting. Waiting for him. Her answer was simple. It was yes. It was always going to be yes. The word yes had barely left Cora's lips, a soft, breathless surrender that hung in the cold night air, when a new sound cut through the silence. Not a howl of challenge, but the rustle of many bodies moving swiftly through the undergrowth, the soft thud of paws on hard earth, and the low, anxious murmurs of human voices. Jax's head snapped up, his body instantly tensing, shifting from a lover to a protector, his arm moving to pull Cora slightly behind him. But the movement was not one of aggression. A profound relief washed over his features, smoothing the lines of worry and pain. From the dark tree line figures emerged. Some were in wolf form, large, powerful beasts with coats of varying shades of gray and brown, their eyes intelligent and alert. Others were men and women, dressed in practical warm clothing made of leather and fur, their faces etched with concern and a fierce determination. They moved with the same quiet power that Jax possessed, their eyes instantly finding their alpha, assessing his condition, and then flicking with open curiosity and surprise to the woman standing so close to him, her hand still clasped in his. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a beard and kind, weary eyes stepped forward. His gaze took in the scene, the battered porch, the lingering scent of the rogue wolves, the blood on Jax's leg, and the way his leader was shielding the human woman. Jax, the man said, his voice a rumble of deep relief. We tracked the rogue's scent. We feared the worst. His eyes darted to Cora again, a silent question in them. Brennan, Jack said, his voice regaining the firm, authoritative tone Cora had only heard glimpses of. But he did not let go of her hand. If anything, his grip tightened, a public declaration. Your timing is, as always, impeccable. The threat has been dealt with. For now. Another figure, a woman with sharp, intelligent features and dark hair braided tightly back, stepped up beside Brennan. Her eyes, a striking amber, scanned Cora with a piercing intensity that felt like it could see right through to her soul. Dealt with? She asked, her tone laced with skepticism. By you? Alone? And with it, a human involved. The word human was not spoken with malice, but with a deep, profound confusion. Jack stood a little taller, his shoulders squaring. He looked from his warriors back to Cora, and his expression softened. Not alone, he said, and his voice carried through the clearing, ensuring every member of his pack heard him. This is Cora. She is the reason I am standing here. She offered me shelter when I was wounded. She defended this territory with courage and strength I have rarely seen. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. She faced the rogues with fire and iron to draw them from me. She fought not as a bystander but as a defender. A ripple of murmurs went through the assembled pack. Looks of shock, disbelief, and a dawning respect replaced the initial suspicion. They looked at the small, seemingly ordinary human woman with new eyes, seeing the strength their alpha described. Jax turned fully to face his people, but he kept Cora's hand firmly in his, including her in the circle of his authority. The rogue pack is bold. They will be back. We must return to the village and prepare our defenses. He finally looked at Cora, his gaze asking a silent question, confirming her choice. Cora's heart was pounding. Dozens of eyes were on her, the weight of their scrutiny immense. This was his world. These powerful, strange, magical people were his family, his responsibility. And he was asking her to step into it. She took a deep, steadying breath and gave a small, firm nod. Jax's face broke into a smile of pride and overwhelming love. He looked back to his pack. Cora is under my protection. She is to be treated with the highest respect as you would treat me. She is. He hesitated, choosing his next words with care, words that would define her place for all of them. She is my guest and my chosen companion. Her safety is your priority. The pack, taking their cue from their alpha, began to nod. Brennan bowed his head slightly in Cora's direction, a gesture of respect. The sharp-eyed woman, though still watchful, offered a curt nod of acknowledgement. The practicalities of departure began. One of the pack members offered Jax a spare tunic and jacket, which he pulled on, finally covering his bare torso. Another approached Cora with a warm, fur-lined cloak, gently placing it over her shoulders without meeting her eyes, a sign of deference. The efficiency and silent communication of the pack were astounding to witness. Cora was given a moment to step inside her cabin. She moved through the familiar space now forever changed. She grabbed a small bag, her hands trembling as she placed a few precious things inside. A small portrait of her family, her favorite book. It felt surreal, like packing for a dream. When she stepped back outside, the pack was ready. Some had already shifted into their wolf forms, large and patient, waiting. Jax stood by the porch, his wound now hastily bandaged by one of his people. He held out his hand to her. Are you ready? He asked, his voice for her ears only. Cora took one last look at her cabin, her solitude, her old life. Then she placed her hand firmly in his, feeling the strength and the promise in his grasp. I'm ready, she said. And as they walked away from the only home she'd known, surrounded by wolves and warriors, Cora knew she wasn't just following a man. She was walking into her future. The journey to the Silvermane village was a passage through a world Cora had never known existed. They moved through the dense, moonlit forest not as a group of individuals, but as a single, flowing entity. The shifted wolves loped ahead and alongside, their movements silent and sure, acting as scouts and guardians. The others, in human form, moved with an uncanny grace, their footsteps making barely a sound on the frozen ground. Jax never left her side, his hand a steady, warm presence on the small of her back, guiding her over rough terrain, his presence a constant reassurance in the overwhelming newness of it all. They followed a path that was invisible to Cora's eyes, a secret trail known only to his people. The air grew colder, the pine trees taller and older, their branches heavy with snow that glittered like diamonds in the moonlight. After what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, the trees began to thin, and the scent of wood smoke and cooking meat grew stronger on the wind. Then they emerged into a wide, hidden valley. Nestled within it, cradled by the protective arms of the mountains, was the village. It wasn't what Cora had expected. There were no crude huts or primitive dwellings. Instead, there were sturdy, beautiful log homes with smoke curling from their stone chimneys, connected by well-trodden paths. There were large communal fire pits, storehouses built into the hillsides, and the sound of a distant, rushing river. It was a place of community, of order, of deep-rooted strength. It was a home. As they entered the village, faces appeared in doorways and at windows. The news of their alpha's return, and the human woman by his side, spread like wildfire. People emerged from their homes, their expressions a mix of relief, curiosity, and for some of the older members, a deep-seated wariness. They bowed their heads as Jax passed, a gesture of respect for their leader, but their eyes were fixed on Cora. She felt a fresh wave of nervousness, the weight of hundreds of unknown eyes upon her. She was an outsider, a human, a disruption to their hidden world. Her hand tightened instinctively around Jax's arm. He felt her tension and stopped walking. He turned to face his people, his posture straight and commanding, every inch the alpha. The murmuring crowd fell silent. "My people," his voice rang out, clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the clearing. "I have returned to you whole and safe." A cheer went up, but he quieted it with a raised hand. "I return to you because of the courage and strength of this woman." He turned slightly, drawing Cora forward to stand beside him, his arm around her shoulders, presenting her to them all. "This is Cora. She found me wounded and alone in the storm. She offered me shelter without question. She tended my injuries with a healer's hands. And when our enemies came to her door, she did not cower. She stood with me. She fought with the heart of a wolf, with fire and courage to defend what was hers." He paused, letting his words sink into the hearts of his pack. "She is under my protection. But more than that, she has my deepest respect and He looked down at her, and his voice, though still strong, softened with a profound tenderness that was for her alone. "She has my love. She has chosen to leave her world to join ours. She will be treated not as a stranger, but as one of our own. She is my chosen companion, and soon she will be my mate." A ripple of shock, then acceptance, then celebration moved through the crowd. The wariness in many eyes melted away, replaced by curiosity and a dawning welcome. They trusted their alpha. If he vouched for her, if he loved her, then she was worthy. Days turned into weeks. Life in the Silvermane village was a whirlwind of new experiences. Cora learned their ways, their rhythms. She helped in the communal kitchens, learning to bake their dense, nutty bread. She sat with the elders, listening to old stories of the pack under the stars. The children, curious and unafraid, were the first to fully accept her, teaching her games and laughing when she stumbled over their language. There were challenges, of course. The woman with the sharp amber eyes, named Lyra, was often watchful, her loyalty to Jax and the pack making her cautious of any change. But even she began to soften when she saw the way Cora looked at Jax, the way she tried to learn, the quiet strength she brought to his side. Jax was true to his word. He was never far from her, patient and loving, explaining their traditions, protecting her from the overwhelming aspects of pack life, and showing her every day how cherished she was. The lonely cabin on the mountain felt like a lifetime ago. Here she was never alone. Here she was part of something. The ceremony took place under the full moon, a symbol of their world and their truth. It was not a human wedding but something older, more profound. Standing before the entire pack, with the moon bathing them in its silvery light, Jax and Cora pledged themselves to each other. They spoke vows of protection, of loyalty, of love that transcended their different beginnings. Jax placed a pendant around her neck, a howling wolf carved from moonstone, the symbol of his rank and his heart, now entrusted to her. As the pack celebrated around a roaring bonfire, with music and dancing that was wild and beautiful, Jax led Cora away from the noise, to a quiet overlook that showed the entire, sleeping valley. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close against his chest, his chin resting on her head. "You are my home, Cora," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "You were my shelter in the storm, and you are the peace in my heart now. My pack is your pack. My life is your life. I will love you until the last star falls from the sky." Cora leaned back into his embrace, watching their new family celebrate in the firelight below. The lonely woman in the cabin was gone. In her place was mated to the alpha, loved, respected, and finally completely home. She had gone from a solitary light in the wilderness to a vital part of a constellation, and her world, once so small and quiet, was now filled with the fierce, beautiful, and eternal song of the pack. And so their story continues, a tale of a frozen wolf and the Omega woman who saved him, a love forged in fire and trust, a bond that would define the future of the Silvermane pack for generations to come. A story of how the most unexpected shelter can become the foundation for the greatest love. Their journey is far from over. New challenges will arise, secrets from the past will emerge, and the strength of their bond will be tested against threats both within and beyond the pack. If you have been captivated by the love of Jax and Cora, if you have felt the chill of the mountain storm and the warmth of their hearth, then you cannot miss what happens next. To ensure you never miss a chapter of their unfolding saga, to journey deeper into the world of the Silvermane pack and discover the mysteries that still lie hidden in the shadows of the pines, subscribe now. Become part of the pack and always be the first to know when a new story begins.